Welcome to Parchment Update, an interview series from the Parchment Community Library to bring your community closer to you. I'm Karen Woodworth, Library Ambassador. I'm joined today by Cheryl Lyon-Jenness, Chair of the City of Parchment Parks and Recreation Committee. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you have some exciting news to share.
I do indeed, and we are really very happy to share this news. What the news is the Parks and Recreation Committee, on behalf of the City of Parchment, applied to the Consumers Energy Foundation for one of their 2025 Planet Award grants. The foundation awards 3 grants a year in this category of environmental concerns, 4 proposals that contribute to the enhancement, the environmental remediation, etc., of air, land, and water in the state. And so the Parks and Recreation Committee submitted a grant entitled Riverfront Park, Restore the Bank, Cool the Corridor. And what we were aiming at is not only actual restoration of the riverbank in an area that we'll talk about in a minute, but also the climatic, the impact on climate of the planting of trees along Commerce Lane. And the idea that we are really enhancing a corridor into the city of Parchment on kind of multiple levels, on the river level and on the actual street level. We were absolutely delighted that we were selected as one of 3 grant recipients in the state of Michigan. One was the city of East Point near Detroit, one was Michigan State University, and the third was the city of Parchment. So what we will do then with the grant resources that we have received is pursue a plan that we laid out in our grant application, and the Parks and Recreation Committee has been discussing and thinking about for some time. We can have the resources now to put that into being for the city.
Well, that really is exciting. I know there's been a lot going on with the river anyway, but tell us some more about this.
Oh, sure. What we're really talking about, and I hope people can kind of envision, and I know that you will put up a map as you develop this, but envision the area near the new overlook at the river. And as I'm sure people know, the removal of the trestle, the building of that overlook, the installation of a kayak launch, and the efforts to control invasive plants along the riverbank there, certainly to make the river more visible, have been supported by a grant from the Kalamazoo River trustees. That was, those folks had resources available as a result of a PCB settlement. In other words, as a result of a pollution settlement. And Parchment applied for actually 2 grants and got them both. And that the one that involved the trestle in that area at the north end of what we know as Riverfront Park is in need of further development. So what the Restore the Bank, Cool the Corridor aims to do is to restore in a modeled way a section of the riverbank that goes from that overlook to the first old overlook that's there past the kayak launch. It may not be obvious to people driving by, but that whole riverbank was really constructed out of industrial waste. In other words, there's a pile of concrete there and other building materials there that make that bank. And so what we're trying to do is to make it a bit more aesthetically pleasing, but also stabilize it in a way that we can plant native plants there. So that's a part of what we were applying for. Another part that we're really excited about is the kind of planting that we think is really important, both to environmental well-being and just to advancing people's knowledge about what they might plant in their yard. And that will be eventually about a 75-foot long shrub and small tree hedgerow, in a sense, that separates this parkland from the Niebuhr facility there. It will curve and it will have trees and shrubs designed to be colorful at various times of the year, but also designed, native trees and shrubs, I should add, but also designed to provide a really good source of food for wildlife, particularly birds. And one of the things that we have funds to do is the incorporation of signage to interpret that for people. So in other words, this can be kind of a model, a little model arboretum, if you will, so people can see what something looks like and perhaps plant it at home. So that will then not enclose, but kind of make a demarcation of where the parkland is. And then south of that border, we will establish at least 3 picnic table areas, handicapped accessible, certainly in one of them, with some shade trees planted at those. So we will have a picnic spot by the river overlook in this riverfront park that we think will be hopefully very, very enticing to people. And then the other part of this is to plant, street trees, native trees along Commerce Lane. Again, interpreting that action so people understand why those trees are planted, what they are, and how they look, how they grow, and what might be useful for people to plant in their yards. So it's multi-pronged, to say the least. We are certainly very aware of the limitations of the maintenance of these sorts of things in this, as these are established, should be relatively simple for the city to maintain going forward. So I'm hoping that it will be a wonderful improvement in that area and will make Riverfront Park, which has such potential because it is adjoining the Kalamazoo River Valley Trail. Hopefully, eventually will adjoin a trail that goes further north through Parchment. And just make it a kind of focal point for those things going in both directions, including a river trail, the kayak launch connecting to a number of other river access points along there.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I want to go back to the riverbank because I'm one of those people that did not know it was constructed from construction waste. So I've got kind of 2 questions about that. One, so does that mean they're going to be taking a lot of stuff out and bringing more dirt in?
Oh,
And secondly, the river has been so high, I feel like the bank actually disappeared. Is that going to have any kind of impact?
no, the bank hasn't disappeared. In fact, it's a very high bank. And if you look across the river in a natural kind of setting there, the bank did disappear because the floodplain extends. But the benefit of having concrete on our side is that the river didn't flood in that direction. No, there's no, we will do minimal kind of excavation of the bank. There's really no need to do that. The bank is quite stable, relatively stable. And this is just a method of improving it so that as you're standing at the overlook and looking back along the bank, you're not seeing piles of broken concrete there, but perhaps fieldstone and something else. And then to integrate into that the planting of native vegetation that would be endemic to that area, that would likely grow in that area and would serve to stabilize the bank even further. So one would not know that there was anything peculiar about that bank until you looked at it from the riverside. And because we now have that overlook that extends out into the river quite a ways, and you look back, you realize that is what it is. And again, there's no desire to remove that. That would be a project way beyond our means, but a desire to improve it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And then I'm intrigued also by what you said about the hedgerow and the kind of mini arboretum there. It sounds like this is intended that people can take a look at this and see if these plants would work in their yards as well. And so maybe have a whole bunch of little mini arboretums across Parchment.
Well, and that's absolutely the case. The one of the bottom lines of this is to encourage people to do planting themselves, to enhance both what cover for wildlife, food for wildlife, and the obvious advantage of pumping more oxygen into our environment, which is the cool the corridor idea was tangled up with what the planting of vegetation does for lowering temperatures, adding oxygen, et cetera, is a really important response to where we are in terms of climate these days. So, and again, the other thing I think that's really important is the educational component of this. Eventually, we hope to have interpretive signage along the river in this area that explains why the downed trees are remaining in the river, why why that's an important function of a natural river. And you know, what does that mean? It's not something that we just drag them out and clean it up entirely. There's reasons that those things are there.
So what's the timeline for this project?
Well, the timeline that we suggested to Consumers Energy as we applied for this was quite rapid. In other words, when we receive the funds, we will go forward with various components of this. One of the things that will determine the timeline is planting times. So I'm guessing that by the time this is structurally in place in terms of the city having the resources, et cetera, that we would look to planting in the fall, which would be the logical time. What we can do quite quickly is have excavated the area where this will go. It will be mulched heavily. It's something that the community cleanup crew in the long run can monitor and keep track of. So that part of it, probably there will be some signs of this happening quickly, and then there will be some pause while things are, you know, being assembled and planted in the fall, which is a better time for the establishment of woody plants of that sort. So that's what we're hoping. I'm not sure. We will need to arrive at a conclusion about the best way to deal with the bank, and that's going to take some expert advice. And then just what is determined there will probably be determined how rapidly it can happen. But again, this is something that we're hoping to move forward with as quickly as possible.
Well, that's great. Yeah. And you mentioned the cleanup crew, and I know the cleanup crew has had many, many sessions of pulling out invasive species. So will planting more native species along the river eventually kind of crowd out those invasives?
That's absolutely what we are aiming for here in many of these things is we'll never have a permanent solution to that, but a solution that is easier for all concerned to maintain. And it makes the river visible, is environmentally sound, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Well, it just sounds wonderful. It sounds like, there'll be even more opportunities for people, families to enjoy the river, and more opportunities for wildlife to enjoy the river, and little food sources. And so before we wrap up, what else would you like us to know?
Well, I guess just hopefully people will watch this process and enjoy the river and the changes. And I'm always hoping people go down and enjoy the overlook because it's quite a pleasant place to stand. I sometimes bring a lawn chair down and sit on the overlook because I like to stare at the river. So I'm hoping people really enjoy. This is a wonderful resource in this little city. And our ultimate goal is to make sure the river really functions as a resource, not a liability. And I just hope people come to see it that way and come to enjoy it.
Yeah, I remember hearing that decades ago it was really in bad shape. And now I have to say I don't need to drive home by the river, but I choose to drive home by the river every day because I just enjoy seeing it. So thank
Right.
you and to everyone else who has put so much work into restoring the Kalamazoo River and will continue to work on that. So thank you so much, Cheryl, for taking the time today to share this news with us.
Sure. Thank you for having me.